Wisconsin is often sold as a quiet slice of America, wide lakes, green forests, and peaceful small towns. From a distance, everything looks simple, comfortable even. But the deeper you go into its more remote areas, that picture begins to shift. Behind the quiet streets and calm-looking homes, there are small towns slowly losing direction. Not because of one major disaster, not because of dramatic events, but because of something much quieter. Disappearing jobs, economies that stop growing, and younger generations leaving without coming back. And in this list, we will see how 15 small towns in Wisconsin slowly change from places to live into places people leave behind. In northern Wisconsin, surrounded by dense forests, Keshena may look calm on the outside, but a closer look shows why this small town is often considered one of the worst, and not without clear, measurable reasons. The main issue lies in a combination of economic and social challenges that are severe for a town of its size. The median household income in Keshena is around $48,000, far below the Wisconsin average of over $65,000. Even more striking, the poverty rate can exceed 40%, making it one of the highest in the state. Another factor is the lack of access to essential services. Healthcare facilities are limited, education options are few, and opportunities for personal growth are scarce. This creates a chain reaction. Young people leave, the population ages, and the economy becomes increasingly stagnant. Among the wide lakes and thick forests of northern Wisconsin, Lac du Flambeau looks like a quiet, almost beautiful place. But beneath that landscape, this small town falls into the worst category because of long-standing economic and social pressure. The numbers make the situation clear. The median household income in Lac du Flambeau is around $35,000, far below the state average. The poverty rate is also high, often recorded above 37%, showing that many residents face real financial limitations. In terms of safety, crime rates, especially property crime, and some violent incidents, are relatively high for a small population. In a community like this, even a small increase in crime feels significant and contributes to a growing sense of insecurity. At the northern edge of Wisconsin, right along the Michigan border, Hurley has a past that was far more lively than its present. This small town was once known as an entertainment hub, filled with bars, nightclubs, and nightlife that rarely slowed down. Today, however, that reputation has become one of the reasons Hurley is often included among the worst small towns. The most noticeable issue is its social reputation and crime level. Hurley is often associated with high alcohol consumption, DUI cases, and property crime. With such a small population, these numbers have a much greater impact on daily life. Its remote location also makes things more difficult. Far from major economic centers, Hurley has limited opportunities for fast growth or recovery. In the flat landscape and wetlands of central Wisconsin, Necedah looks like a quiet small town, almost untouched. But that is exactly where the problem lies. Necedah falls into the category of worst small towns because of a mix of isolation, a weak economy, and very limited opportunities. The poverty rate is also relatively high, close to 20% or more, showing that many residents live in financially fragile conditions. The biggest problem is jobs. Necedah does not have a strong industrial base. Most work comes from small sectors such as local services, farming, or seasonal jobs. The unemployment rate in this area has even reached double digits at times, something rare for a small town and a clear sign of a stagnant economy. What makes Necedah fall even further behind is its lack of access and connectivity. Its location is far from major economic centers like Madison or Milwaukee, making mobility for work, education, or business much more limited. Adams shows how that situation can develop, not just into stagnation, but into more visible social pressure. As a small center in Adams County, Adams should have a stronger economic role. But in reality, this town is often included among the worst small towns because of a mix of low income, relatively high crime, and a lack of stable job opportunities. Unlike Necedah, which feels quieter, Adams faces problems that are easier to see. Crime, especially property crime, is above average for a small town. In a community with a limited population, that creates the feeling that the area is becoming less safe. Geographically, Adams is not as remote as the northern towns. But that is exactly what makes the contrast stand out. The access is there. Yet, the opportunities still do not come. If Adams begins to show pressure in a visible way, then Plainfield takes the story in a quieter and stranger direction. At first glance, Plainfield is just a small village in the middle of Wisconsin, surrounded by fields and quiet roads that seem unchanged for decades. What makes Plainfield different, however, is its reputation. The town is known as the hometown of Ed Gein, the infamous criminal whose case in the 1950s inspired characters in films like Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Even though that happened decades ago, the shadow of it still lingers and indirectly shapes the public image of the town. In terms of modern crime, the numbers are not as high as in some other towns on this list. But the lack of economic opportunity and growth remains the main problem. Many young people choose to leave, leaving behind a small community that struggles to develop. Wautoma presents a reality that feels more immediate, more active, but also under more pressure. As a small center in Wautoma County, Wautoma does have slightly more visible economic activity than the towns mentioned earlier. The median household income in Wautoma is around $32,000, still below the Wisconsin average. The poverty rate is also fairly significant, close to 26%, showing that many residents are still struggling financially, even though the town appears more active. The most noticeable issue is the crime rate, especially property crime. Compared with other small towns of similar size, case numbers in Wautoma tend to be higher. In terms of jobs, the options remain limited, mostly in services, retail, or low-paying local work. There is no major industry truly driving long-term growth. Phillips brings us back to a quieter reality, more remote and far more limited. Located in Price County, deep in northern Wisconsin, Phillips falls into the worst small town category mainly because of extreme isolation and limited economic opportunity. This is the kind of place where the problems are not always loud, but are deeply felt over time. The median household income in Phillips is around $47,000, still below the state average. The poverty rate is also fairly high for a town of this size, reflecting a local economy that is not truly growing. The main issue is simple but critical. There are not enough jobs. The economy here still depends largely on older sectors like forestry, local services, and a small amount of nature-based tourism. Isolation is the deciding factor. Phillips is far from any major city, making access to work, education, and essential services much more limited. If Phillips feels like a town slowly being left behind because of isolation, then Park Falls tells a slightly different story. not just remote, but once economically alive, and then stripped of that pulse. Known as a Flambeau river town, Park Falls once depended heavily on lumber and manufacturing. For decades, those industries formed the backbone of the local economy. But when those sectors weakened and many facilities closed or scaled back operations, the impact was immediate, and it still lingers today. That is the main reason Park Falls is included among the worst small towns, an economy that lost its main foundation. Unlike Phillips, which feels quietly stagnant, Park Falls carries a more visible sense of loss. Many buildings and pieces of infrastructure are still standing, but they no longer serve the purpose they once did. Meanwhile, Abbotsford presents a slightly different dynamic, more alive, but still trapped in limits that are hard to break through. Located between Marathon and Clark County, Abbotsford actually has more visible economic activity than many of the towns mentioned earlier. Food processing, especially the dairy sector, remains the local backbone. But that is exactly where the paradox lies. There is industry, but it is not strong enough to raise overall prosperity in a broad way. The median household income in Abbotsford is around $68,000. Even so, many of the available jobs tend to be low-paying and offer limited mobility. The town also faces more complex social challenges, including growing needs in education services and community integration. Spooner sits in a slightly lighter position, not a town in collapse, but not yet truly free from the shadow of stagnation either. Located in Washburn County, Spooner has one advantage that many other towns on this list do not: its connection to tourism. But even with that, Spooner still falls into the worst small town category because of its heavy dependence on a seasonal economy. The median household income in Spooner is around $44,000, slightly better than some of the earlier towns, but still below the Wisconsin average. The poverty rate is around 21%, showing that economic stability is far from evenly shared. The main issue is not a lack of activity. If anything, it is the opposite. But that activity is inconsistent. When the tourist season slows down, many jobs disappear or lose hours. Antigo takes us to a slightly larger scale, and that is exactly where the problems become more visible. As the main city in Langlade County, Antigo is not as small as the towns before it. Its infrastructure is more complete, and its economy is more varied. But instead of being an advantage, Antigo is often placed in the worst small town category because its stagnation happens on a larger scale, and the impact feels more obvious. The median household income in Antigo is around $45,000, still far below the Wisconsin average. The poverty rate is also fairly high, nearing 20%, showing that economic growth has not been evenly shared, even though the town is larger. The most noticeable issue is the crime rate, especially property crime, which is relatively high compared with other small towns of similar size. With a larger population, the number of cases is also higher, and that strengthens the perception that Antigo has real social problems. If Antigo feels like a town struggling to catch up, then Merrill shows the next stage, a town that was once fairly stable but is slowly losing its footing. Located in Lincoln County, Merrill was once known as a lumber and paper mill town. For many years, those industries formed the foundation of the local economy. But as they weakened and some operations closed or scaled back, the impact became clear. Jobs shrank and growth slowed with them. That is why Merrill falls into the worst small town category, not because it has completely collapsed, but because it has lost the economic momentum that once supported it. The median household income here is around $53,000, still below the Wisconsin average. The poverty rate is also fairly significant, nearing 18%. Tomahawk presents a slightly different picture, a town that still stands fairly stable, but quietly depends on a fragile foundation. Located in Lincoln County and known as the gateway to the Northwoods, Tomahawk has one advantage. Many other towns on this list do not: tourism and outdoor culture. Events like the Tomahawk Fall Ride each year even attract tens of thousands of visitors, giving the town a sizable seasonal economic boost. But beneath that, Tomahawk still falls into the worst small town category because it depends on an unstable economy. The median household income is around $60,000, still below the state average, with a poverty rate of about 13%. Job opportunities outside tourism and services remain limited. There are not many major industries able to provide long-term, high-paying work. That means when the tourist season ends, economic activity slows down too, and many jobs become inconsistent. Prentice takes us to an even quieter point, a small town not facing major pressure, but one that has barely had enough to grow from the beginning. Located in Price County, not far from Phillips, Prentice is a classic example of a worse small town in its simplest form. Too small, too limited, and too far from centers of opportunity. The main problem is not high crime or a major social crisis. In fact, it is the opposite. There is almost no momentum at all. Job opportunities are very limited, mostly in local businesses, basic services, or work tied to natural resources. There is no major industry, no significant investment, and almost no new growth. Isolation makes this even harder. Its remote location limits access to jobs, education, and other opportunities.